Okay, and so attendees, I would like to ask if you have questions, please type them in. I'm going to keep the audio or your audio muted so we don't have a lot of background noises. So if you have questions, please type them in and I will be monitoring that. I will pause occasionally to open it up for any questions. Thank you also to those who sent any questions ahead of time when you registered. I have incorporated most of those into the questions that we're going to be asking, so thank you for doing that. And really, this session is for you, so please be sure to ask the things that are on your mind so that you get out of it what you want. But why don't we begin by meeting our panelists, and I'm going to ask Jason to kick us off in just giving a brief introduction, including your career history and the type of institution where you currently work now.
Okay. So I'm Jason Andrus. I am a professor at Meredith College. I've been there, this is now my 12th year, but I'm probably the oldest person by quite a bit here. So to start my career off, I finished with the undergraduate degree in biology at Wake Forest. I went to NC State for a PhD in microbiology. During that time, I actually got a chance to teach cell biology at Durham Technical Community College as an adjunct, and I did that for 3 semesters. I started out as a traditional postdoc at UNC in the Department of Genetics. I was there for, I think, 3 years as a traditional postdoc. And then at that time, I had an opportunity to do something called the SPIRE Postdoctoral Fellowship, which is an NIH-sponsored fellowship. And I can give you a little bit more about that. But the nuts and bolts of it, it was 2/3 research, 1/3 teaching. So I spent a year as a visiting professor at UNC Pembroke. And then after that, I got my first tenure track position at a college in Georgia, Augusta State University, which is now Augusta University. They've merged actually with the Medical College of Georgia. But I left before that merger, but I was there for 3 years. And then my wife and I wanted to get back to the Research Triangle Park area. At Meredith College, where I'm at now, which is a small private women's liberal arts college in Raleigh, had a position open. So I applied and got it. I've been here quite a bit. I've actually got, so just to give you a heads up, I've had tenure. I got promoted last year to full professor, and I'm actually the incoming department chair. So, and I'm on 3 search committees right now, so I can give you as much information as you want.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Meghan.
Yeah, so I completed my undergrad at Wellesley College in 2005 in biochemistry and English. Started my PhD program in biophysics at UPenn, actually, and then the advisor that I was working with moved to Duke after my first year. So I moved with him, so finished my PhD in chemistry in 2011. And then I did a traditional research postdoc at NC State for 2.5 years, and then moved from there into my academic job at High Point University, which is where I'm at now. And so this is my 6th year. HPU is a private co-ed, primarily undergraduate institution, though we do have several master's programs and a lot of professional programs, particularly in health-related fields. So we're mid-sized. We've got about 5,000 undergrads.
Okay, thank you so much. And Lauren?
Hi, yes, I'm Lauren Lowman. I am an assistant professor at Wake Forest University in the engineering department. It's a general engineering department that is undergraduate only. But I also have affiliate status in the physics department, which does have a PhD granting program, so I can admit and advise PhD students through that program. My background is a little non-traditional. I have my undergraduate degree from Duke University, but in public policy studies. And then for my master's, I did a master's in civil environmental engineering and then continued to do a PhD in civil and environmental engineering. And I think that the non-traditional path that I took really informed why I came to Wake Forest University, because I really believed in this idea of a liberal arts education, even if you're in the STEM fields. And that's what I get to do with my teaching and with my research here, and I really enjoy it.
Great. And you went straight from your PhD program into the role, right?
Yes, I defended in May 2018, and I started my position here in July 2018. So there was very little overlap.
Wow. Okay, so the next question is, could you tell us a little bit about the expectations around how research, teaching, and service are defined at your institution? And then maybe talk a little bit about this quote unquote work-life balance or work-life integration. What does that look like for you? Do you want to go ahead and start, Lauren?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So my position here and for all of the tenure track faculty, the breakdown for research, teaching, and service is 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service. And so what that looks like is about a course load of 2 each semester. But that second course, if you're teaching a class that has a lab, that typically counts. So it's not, the semesters are definitely very teaching heavy, but research is also, just as valued. So it's an equal part of my job in terms of having to balance that and getting that done. And in terms of the work-life balance, I agree with earlier on the call, Meghan was saying she calls it work-life, or has a colleague that calls it work-life integration. It's not so much as of a balance as like an oscillation. Some weeks you have more time for things that you enjoy doing outside of work, and some weeks I have things that I have a lot of deadlines, but they're important to me. And I think for me, it's always making that conscious choice of, if it's work and it's encouraging on time that I like to use for what I do outside of work, like the weekends or evenings, and it's like a conscious choice that this is something that's really important to me, that I think is really important to my career. Otherwise, I try not to, just go home and answer emails, because I think that pretty much most emails in academia can wait. So I try to prioritize spending time with my family and friends when I can.
Okay, great. And what about you, Jason?
So at Meredith College, so the way you kind of figure out, I think the way to go is looking at the faculty role model that's usually in the faculty guides for different colleges. So it's been different. The expectations have been different wherever I've worked. And currently at Meredith College, our large, it's a little bit amorphous, but if we had to put a percentage on it, it's probably 70% teaching. We're primarily a teaching first institute. And then the remainder 30% can be divided up how you want, and it's really dependent upon what you agree with your department chair. So at the end of the semester, you sort of pick where you want to put your efforts into. So at a small liberal arts college like we are, it's not research heavy. We do research, but primarily to get undergraduates involved in science. So our contributions to science really at Meredith are more about training the next generation than it is about our publications. We have a high teaching load, so that's the expectation primarily for us. But with service, it could be we do a lot of service within the school. There's some we're getting coming up for accreditation, so there's a lot of people who that will be their service for the next 2 years, is getting ready for the SACS accreditation, which is a bit of a nightmare. But there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of pull it. As far as work-life balance, it's one of the perks of working at the job that I work at is it's a pretty good work-life balance. I just, as I mentioned before, I had a dentist appointment, as did my daughter, so we had to run to the dentist and run back, and I had time to get that done. It is a good work-life balance. You can get overwhelmed, especially with the emails, like you said, academic emails. Most of those are not primarily important. But I actually have taken on telling my students that think of it as like banking hours, because now that I've got my kids are older and they have a lot of sports activities and things of that sort, I have to reserve the time home for them. So I say, you can email me at night, just don't expect any email responses. And it's a policy that I think our school encourages, because it's a little, I think the generation of students, the expectation is I'll email you, you email me as soon as you see it. But I'm trying to lower that expectation that, the weekends are my family time, the evenings are my family time. So I may or may not respond to the email. And actually, it's been really positive. I think that's been a really good thing. And, and they know that expectation, and they usually say, we know you won't respond to this until tomorrow. But as far as the work-life balance, it's fantastic at a small where it's not research heavy. So we, this last week, Wake County Schools, where I'm at, I think the kids went to school for a total of 7 hours with holidays and snow days. And so they actually got to come to work with me, which they don't like, but you know, having the job really affords you that opportunity. So it's pretty good work-life balance.
Thanks. And what about you, Megan?
So I think High Point's probably in between Wake and Meredith. Our teaching is probably more like 60%, and research is 20 to 30, and then service is somewhere around 10 to 15, depends on kind of where you are. You know, if you're an assistant professor, a little bit less service, and you should really be trying to get your research up and running. And then once you're an associate professor, I'm not there yet, fingers crossed in the next couple weeks, but I'm told that that's coming, that my service load is going to suddenly just pile. But we are moving more towards being a more research active, primarily undergraduate institution. So we still have a high teaching load. So my teaching load is 12 hours a semester, but we do get some credit for doing research and having research students involved. So it roughly breaks down to about 3 classes a semester, and a lab would count as a class. So usually 2 lectures in a lab, or a lecture in 2 labs is usually a typical load for a tenure track assistant professor. And then in terms of research expectations, they want us to be working with students, but we do have an expectation that we'll be publishing and we'll be taking students to present their research at local, regional, national meetings, and trying to get that name out there and making those contributions. So training the next generation, but also making that contribution to the scientific field. And yeah, and in terms of work-life balance, so it's great in terms of things like I'm working from home today because my daughter also has a doctor's appointment, so I'm shuttling kids back and forth, and then taking her with me this afternoon to go meet with a speaker. So so she gets to come along for those kinds of things. But you know, if you're not at work, that might mean that you're grading the papers, you know, tonight after dinner. Might be sitting doing that in front of the TV. So it's really more about managing your own work-life balance and deciding what's important for you and what your priorities are. And I think that's been the tough point for me to figure out, is that there's not going to be anybody coming along to say, here is how much time you should spend on your job, and here's how much time you should spend on your family. You have to make that choice, and then just say, and learn how to say no, and when to say no, and what are the things that are important to you, and important to your career. So I think that's been the bigger lesson that I've had to figure out, is that it's okay to say no, and what things do I really want to say no to, and what do I want to say yes to.
And that's part and parcel of, as you evolve as a faculty member, once you become more senior, once you get your tenure, you realize I didn't have to work probably as much as I thought I did. Whereas as first year faculty, or as you're trying to get your sea legs, you feel like you have to take on everything. I empathize with that completely.
That's great. Thank you. Megan, could you kick us off for the next one, which is, what is you already gave us a snapshot, but what does your week generally consist of, and what one thing do you wish you had more time for?
Yeah, so my week, there's, usually a significant amount of time spent in class and doing some class prep or grading. And kind of the breakdown of that just depends on the week. Student meetings, if you're ramping up towards midterms or finals, or just that part of the semester where I primarily teach organic chemistry. So there's a part in the semester where they all start deciding that they're all going to fail and their life plans are falling apart. And so usually you can pretty much set a clock that all of a sudden my student meetings are going to ramp up, or the requests for meetings are going to ramp up. So those will happen. And then I try to spend a good amount of time in the research lab. I have undergrads, so they are not, there are no grad students, there are no postdocs. So there's nobody to manage the lab but me, which means I do all the ordering. It means I do all the troubleshooting. I teach them how to do the assays. So it's sort of like being a grad student, postdoc, faculty member all wrapped up into one. So that's kind of where that ends up. If I had more time, I would love to have more time to just sit and think. I think finding that time to just kind of let your mind wander and say, gosh, I've been mulling over this problem that we've been having in the lab. What could be going on there? And just having the time to sit and think about it from a different angle or come up with a new random idea. That's what I wish I had more time for, but summers are good for that, and breaks to kind of take that time to just not have the day-to-day stuff. So that's usually when I try and be creative.
Okay, thanks. And Lauren or Jason, either of you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I'll say what my week looks like at the end of the week is so different from whatever I plan in the beginning of the week. So typically, I guess it really depends on if it's fall semester versus spring semester versus summer, because I'm in a brand new department. The engineering department started 1 year before I got here, which was part of the reason why I joined. I was really excited to be able to contribute to developing a new program as a junior faculty member. But with it comes a higher service expectation because there are fewer faculty and tenured faculty to help with a lot of the things that need to get done. So I served on, so this spring we do hiring committees, and I served on a hiring committee last spring, and I'm leading a hiring committee this spring. So that's a pretty large, so regular meetings that have to do with that take up a lot of my time this semester. I teach 2 days a week, Tuesday, Thursdays, and I teach in 3-hour blocks. So that can be usually after I teach for 3 hours, my brain's kind of mush and I can't do much thinking, like Meghan was saying, to really sit and think and do research. So I usually just use those days to do class planning. Mondays, I typically meet with my research undergrads that help me in the lab. But just like Meghan says, I don't have a postdoc. If I could hire one, and I am looking into doing that, but right now I don't have the support in the lab. So if something needs to get done, something needs to get ordered or returned, or training the students, it's all on me. I think that's the hardest part, is no research gets done unless I'm doing it. And so I have to make sure that I'm making time regularly during my week to set aside if I want to make progress on research. And one thing that my week that's really important to me that I always have is lunch. I just spend an hour at lunch and I sit down with colleagues and I don't sit in my office and work. I think it's really important to just have that break. So that's something that's really important to me that I always do. Not everyone does it. I definitely have some colleagues who sit in their office and eat lunch, but that's probably what I look forward to every day is, I'm like, oh, it's about noon. Let's go like walk around the halls and see who's up for getting some lunch today. So yeah, that's my typical week.
Okay. And is that, would you say, in terms of what you wish you had more time for?
Gosh, what I wish I had more time for. I think I agree with Meghan that I'd love more time to think. Yeah, being able to actually sit down and talk to my colleagues about, say, research rather than the things that are present, like hiring or other things related to service for the department or curriculum development. I love talking about all of those things, but it would be nice to be able to just mingle with colleagues who are closer to my research area. So I guess that's another aspect. Our department is in a satellite campus in downtown. And so a lot of my colleagues, while they're all engineers, they don't necessarily do the same. They're not civil and environmental engineers. And those that are do very different research. So funny enough, the people who probably do the research that's closest to mine are the people in the biology department. And so I'm actually sitting in one of my colleagues' office in the biology department because we had a last-minute research thing come up this morning. He was kind enough to let me use his office. But yeah, I would love to have more time to be able to, come to the main campus and mingle with my colleagues here and sit in on their, research seminars.
Great, thank you. And Jason, what about you?
So it'll be a little bit different for me, just again, coming from a different stage in my career. So once this is for Meghan and Lauren, once you've sort of had a few iterations of classes, they I hate to say it, but they kind of get a little bit on autopilot, which is nice in the sense that, you're not having to ramp up for a class or decompress after a class because it just segues. So my schedule's a little bit different this semester, and a lot of this is by design. So I teach 3 consecutive classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I teach from 9:30 to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon straight, which is by design. So, and that actually affords me a little bit of time. So I take my lunch, for instance, at that point afterwards, and I like to be in my office alone and decompress after that. And then after that, I usually have office hours because we're actually required to have office hours for students. And then overlapping that will be a lot of student researchers. So I've got also 7 undergraduate researchers right now. And I'm also coordinating, we have a 2-stage undergraduate research where they actually take a class. So part of my instruction period is actually with that class. And we have a water quality assessment project that we do. And I co-teach that with another faculty member. So we kind of use that as a springboard to get students involved in their research. So a lot of the times in the afternoon, I'm answering my research students and these 299, this research class student stuff. Wednesdays, I teach microbiology lab from, and again, this is by design. So I teach it from 2 until about 8:30 at night. I have back-to-back labs. And again, it works better for me at this point, which means I don't have class on Mondays or Fridays, which is great because I've got meetings. We have 3 search committees going on. We had a lot of turnover in our department recently due to a lot of unforeseen things. And so I'm also on the general education committee, so I've got a lot of work with that. We're in the process of trying to put together a master's program. So I've got one of the elements I have to take care of for that. We're putting together a grant proposal for the Borough's Welcome Fund. So your time gets really sort of chopped up a little bit. And it's fun and exciting. I used to wait tables, so it's a lot like getting really slammed at waiting tables, which actually I really like because it doesn't give me a chance to realize how busy I am. So you just kind of go from one meeting to the next. And you know what, you get kind of used to it. And so, you know, you just find those moments where you take a break and you just sit down and you do something stupid, like, I don't know, listen to a podcast or something just to take your mind off of things. Cause I think you need those sort of restorative moments. And I do that periodically throughout the day. And our department is really great in the sense that it's very organic as far as our meetings. So we're constantly popping into each other's office and just sharing ideas, whatever it is. And that's one of the things I value is I have great colleagues, both in the biology department, but chemistry is upstairs and math is upstairs as well. So there's always an opportunity to sort of speak to these people and it's whether it's a teaching idea or a research idea, because we do have a lot of collaborative projects, or just venting about the day. It's sort of very free flowing in that regard. And again, having the luxury of teaching these classes for so many years, you don't have to stress about, all right, what am I going to talk about in class tomorrow? So, which is really nice. And it's the same thing with the lab prep. Since I've done these labs so many times, the lab preps, you just kind of go into this default mode. You've already got it taken care of what needs to be ready. So the good news is it does sort of get into a little bit of a routine that makes it a lot more manageable.
So is there any particular thing that you wish you had more time for in your?
Oh, everything. Yeah, take your pick. There's nothing specific. It's just, there's never enough hours in the day. And I've just come to terms with that. And yeah, I could use more hours. I could use more money. And those two things are always in short supply. So I actually don't dwell on that too much. And I just make sure that when I leave work, I'm leaving work. You know, and I've tried to become as efficient as possible. So we have a lot of, I'm sure Lauren and Meghan have these as well, the online course management systems. And so I've set it up so that most of the grading, as much of the grading as I feel comfortable giving over to the computer, takes care of, which is nice. So I can minimize that so I can spend time doing more things like with our advising, which is really important for our campus, and helping students. We have students are always kind of, for lack of a term, freaking out about, oh, I'm finishing and I don't know what I'm going to do. So there's a lot of sort of life coaching with that, in addition to the academic advising.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you all. This next question I'll just toss out, and anyone who's interested in tackling it, feel free to. So this is about your research program. And if you can describe a little bit of what the research program at your institution looks like. For example, where does the funding come from, or where does your salary come from?
So take this one first. So the funding is nominal at best. We have a budget for coursework, and part of the coursework budget is research. So we're really stretched thin. So what's really kind of, I think it's actually kind of fun and interesting is you learn how to do science on a shoestring budget, which actually gets you to do really good science. You're not, publications are less important, and if you're keeping up with where we are in science, reproducibility is a big issue. And so there's a lot of questions about where should we be pouring our resources in. I will say that it's very difficult for us to get funding for a variety of reasons. We've put in some major research instrumentation grants. We've put in some NIH research grants. And the fundamental question they always have for us is when you're going to get the work done. They know our teaching load being what it is. And so it's a real vicious cycle. They expect to have evidence that you can do this, which is very difficult to do when you don't have funding. And if you don't have funding, you have very difficult time to kind of manage where that is. So, but all that being said, we've got the nice thing is we've got really creative projects. We get projects that people probably would never fund from a grant perspective. I have a colleague who's an environmental epidemiologist, and we are looking at whether or not armadillos shed Mycobacterium leprae, which causes leprosy, into their burrows. And so that's an interesting project that has it's a hyper-specific thing, but we're finding some really interesting results with that. And so, being flexible about doing research projects on them, you can do good science without having a lot of budget. Again, at our school, it's really imperative that you get the teaching and the advising taken care of first. So that's where your priority is. And so there is no real funding for research unless you have brought funding in with you. And again, it's going to make your life a lot more stressful we teach anywhere between 21 and 24 hours a year, which is pretty extensive. And this does not include labs. Lab preps are figured out differently. So a 3-hour lab prep only gives you like an hour credit. And there's a lot of interesting aspects to that. So we have our advising periods coming up. That's a black hole for all of us in the biology department. We have the most number of majors, but we're like a mid-level department as far as numbers. So we actually spend a solid 2 weeks just advising, and we just can't get anything else done. So again, ours is a lot different probably than the other two colleges that are being represented here. But all of that is taken into context with regards to our tenure and promotion. And so with regards of the research, I can say that when it comes to our applying, the department sets the expectation of what can be done reasonably here. So when I was a graduate, when I was a postdoc, I came from a lab spending $80,000 a month. And now here, I'm lucky if I get $80 a semester for students. So, but it's all doable. It can be done, and it's a challenge, but it's a creative challenge. And I think there's something real fun about that. And again, a lot of it is the students get to sort of direct the projects, and that's actually bode well for our students. We have a really high success rate of placing them into graduate programs or into industry simply because they have that unique experience of being able to drive their own research.
Excellent. Lauren or Megan?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. So when I accepted this position, I was given a startup, and it was comparable to the offers that I received from R1s. So to me, that told me that the expectation was similar. Of course, in terms of like the number of publications or the dollar amount for bringing in external funding, it's not going to be as high as an R1 because we do have a slightly higher teaching load. But my startup was comparable, and so I have that funding. I haven't completely spent that down yet on equipment, but I have ordered some things that I need for my lab. I was given a research space, and so in terms of finding other funding, I have definitely submitted grants to NSF and NASA to support my research. Haven't hit anything yet. Hopefully will soon, and I'm actually working on submitting a proposal on that's due on Tuesday. So that's fun. And then like in terms of the program, I don't think that in terms of like the science questions and research ideas that that I would want to pursue if I were at an R1, that hasn't changed, and I certainly have that ability, especially because I can hire PhD students once or postdocs, as long as I have the funding to support them. And in terms of my own salary, I'm on a 9-month, and so I can also use my startup or external funding to pay for my summer salary to continue doing research in the summer. But yeah, my research program is growing. I have a lot of different ideas. The reason why I'm sitting in this office right now, it's actually a pretty fun project that I'm collaborating with a biologist and an electrical engineer on to observe, to take temperature measurements and controlled burns. And so we thought we would get to burn today. It looks like it's a little too windy, but we had to set up our instruments and our temperature sensors and test it all out. So at least we tested it, but we'll have to go and break it down later today. But yeah, I think being at Wake Forest, it doesn't, I know that the expectation in terms of the final products that I have to deliver that I'm evaluated on for research, it's not as intense as being at an R1, but for me, it still feels very similar because I was given the same starting point. So I think for me personally, I'm still negotiating how much do I actually need to do. But I think in the long run, I'm interested in pursuing these problems. So putting in the effort to submit these grants and do this research, it is also just sort of driven by my own interest in it as well.
Great. And whenever you're ready to look for postdocs, let us know and we'll be happy to spread the word around here.
I'm looking for them right now, so.
I'll follow up with you and get, just a little blurb that we could share.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And Megan, what about you?
Yeah, so ours is again, I think kind of in between Jason at Meredith and Lauren at Wake Forest. So we, during the school year when we're primarily involved in teaching, the research happens at a slower pace because the students, again, undergraduates, they're involved in their classes and all of their extracurricular activities. And so what you can get done is, it's probably about 1/10 of what you can get done during the summer if you're doing dedicated research time. We do have a summer research program. It's 8 weeks. Faculty who participate, you apply to participate in the program. And so we get a stipend, the students get a stipend, and they get on-campus housing and a meal plan. And then it's expected that they'll do 8 weeks worth of research work. And so we've had a lot of success with that program. The students have gotten really interested in it. And it's been great for our research programs. In terms of funding, the expectation at our university is that you will apply for external funding, but it's not expected that you get it. So I'm on a 9-month contract as well, but it pays out over 12 months. So, when you're thinking about what does a 9-month salary mean, it does not mean that you have no cash coming in for May through August. They will still pay you. But if you get external funding and you have written in to pay yourself summer salary, then you get that as an additional. So I'm the PI on an NIH grant that we just got funded in September, so that just started. So I'll actually be getting a raise this summer, which is great. But of course, once I don't have NIH funding anymore, I don't get that cash. So that's where that goes. We have had success. We also just got an NSF MRI to get an NMR, which if there's any chemists and biochemists in the audience, we didn't have one. So you can imagine being an organic chemist without an NMR was really fun for 6 years. It wasn't, but it's really fun now. So we are growing in terms of research. This kind of, I guess, gets towards what our tenure expectation is. We've been told we need at least one publication coming from our work as an independent scientist. So that may mean it's collaborating with somebody at an R1 institution. It may mean that you and your students are collaborating back with your postdoc advisor, your graduate advisor, or it may be just what's coming out of your lab. So there's been some leeway, but because we're a primarily undergraduate institution, there's also a big push to try and get the undergrads on those papers, because the idea is we want HPU's name out there, but we also really want to set up these scientists for the next generation and be training them to go on and do what they want to do and be successful at their careers. So we're kind of navigating that and moving into kind of a more research active, and so it's evolving and changing, but that's kind of where it is right now.
And if I could piggyback on that, one thing I would mention, I'd be remiss if we didn't, is where your campus actually is a big deal for us. We actually have a lot of good, strong collaborations with Duke, UNC, and NC State for research. So we have sort of that built-in advantage, but also so many of our students go to work at the park, and we have so many contacts within the Research Triangle Park. We get a ton of equipment and supplies donated to us. So the pressing need to, like you mentioned, NMR, we have an NMR, which is great. We had someone, Cotton Inc., the research group, donated a mass spec for us. And we have HPLCs that get donated to us. So it being in our location, we're really unique in that regard. So I applaud you for getting that funding. That's fantastic. And it shows you that we're at a uniquely unusual circumstance where we actually have access to some of those equipment. So it makes our research much easier than at a place where it's a little bit more difficult to come across those items.
Yeah, well, and piggybacking off of that too, I think I'd say, if you're thinking about a job at not an R1, it can be really important to keep those contacts, right? So like keep contacts with the folks you're in grad school with right now. The people, if you do a postdoc, or if you are a postdoc, keep in touch with all of those folks, because you never know when you're either going to collaborate. So one of my collaborators was my Bay mate in grad school, and she's at University of Richmond. So we both have undergrads, but she had more resources than I did for a long time. So we were collaborating and helping each other out there. And then, I talk with other friends of mine from postdocs, and stay in touch with my advisors, who have been wonderful about saying, hey, we've got some free stuff that we don't need. Do you want it? Yes, I will always take your free stuff. So I think just like Jason said, that location is great, particularly if you have lots of, and keeping those connections with the alumni from your institution who've left. Former students will come back and be doing stuff and saying, hey, similarly, we had a former student from HPU who went to go work at Shimadzu, which is an instrument company. And he came back and said, hey, they're starting these programs where they're giving a huge discount if you buy a bunch of instrumentation in bulk, and they want to set up this ongoing collaboration. And he managed to strong arm the president into funding this. And so we got a whole bunch. We had no mass specs either. So we got mass specs, we got GCs, we got HPLCs, we had all this stuff just kind of arrive because we had one of our alums who said, you guys need this, and I want to push this forward and give back to my university that way, which has been really nice. So there's definitely creative ways if you don't have the funding yet, or you don't have the resources yet, to get what you need to get your research done.
Yeah,
and that's Meghan, one thing. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to piggy off of what Meghan was saying about, first, like keeping contacts with people that you know from your graduate school. Like that's been super useful in terms of building new collaborations and finding people to work with and apply for grants with, especially since I'm the only one who sort of does what I do at my university. So being able to have that network of people to work with, but also working with undergraduates, and being at a college that's so focused on educating undergraduates, it's actually a huge benefit, because they provide a lot of programs to support undergraduate research. So last summer, and hopefully this summer, I've had undergraduates that are fully supported by the university, where they get a stipend, they get summer housing, and they get an allowance for food as well, or a meal plan, and they're able to just spend their whole summer working with me in the lab on a project of their choosing that is beneficial to my research. And I think it's a great experience for the student, because they get to see different labs and see what they like in terms of research. But then it's also great for the PI, because it sort of gives you extra helpers that you don't have to worry about having your own funding to be able to support them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you were saying it perfectly, being at a small school where the faculty interact so closely with the students, it builds a real sort of continual support system, from the sense that They then start looking out for the institution, which is how we get access to a lot of this equipment and whatnot. And I think that's a unique thing that happens at small schools. Large state schools may have it, but it tends to be more focused on like athletics with their connections, whereas at a smaller school, it really is a connection with the faculty and the department they came from.
That's great. Thanks. I'm keeping an eye on questions, but also the time. So feel free, if you have a burning question, type it in and I will fold it into the ones that I plan to ask. And then in about 10 minutes or so, we'll just open it up to general Q&A. But I know in the registration, quite a few people wanted to know if you could speak about what tends to impress members of the search committee, and also maybe a bit about the interview process and how to best prepare for an interview at your type of institution.
So it's funny because we just, we're about to start bringing people in for in-person interviews. And we went through a video interview process, and, of course you have the paper applications that come in that you review first. And I guess I didn't think about it as much when I was applying, because it just seemed like a no-brainer for me. Like if I was applying, I was going to talk about what interested me in the school. But it's surprising how many people forget to actually tie it into the place that they're applying to, and that it leaves a big question mark for the committee's mind. Why does this is this even the right fit? Do they understand what type of institution we are? Especially because at Wake Forest, we do value the teaching so much. And so when people apply and they really only focus on the research, it is kind of a turnoff, because we take teaching and curriculum development very seriously, and it's very important to us. So yeah, just knowing a little bit about the program, seeming excited about it is really important, because I think for me, we're investing in a new colleague that will hopefully be here for a long time with us. So, you want to find someone who seems like they really want to work with you and work at your institution. And I think that for me, that's the most important thing that I keep an eye out for: excitement, and if they know what we're about, if they've taken the time to research what our school is about.
Yeah, we just finished doing 2 searches, and one of the things that stood out is, oh my goodness, please have somebody check your written materials for typos. The number of times you get incomplete sentences, run-on sentences, things, or the wrong university in the cover letter, like, ooh, that's a death knell. So I think having somebody, but also think about the kind of institution you're applying to, and if you know somebody, or if you can go to the Duke postdoc services or Duke grad school services and say, hey, do we have any alums who are at an institution like this, or are even at that institution that you could talk to? Ask them what they're looking for, ask them what kind of things, because we got a lot of letters where, I guess similar to Lauren at Wake Forest, people assumed that it was just research and not teaching. And we get a lot of people applying assuming that all they need to do is be a good teacher and they don't need to have a research program. And that's not going to fly for us either. So kind of, knowing your audience, knowing what you want, and definitely enthusiasm, and having, and that's for the written stuff. And then when you do a video chat, practice. It's a weird medium. Don't sneeze into the camera. I had that one. That was real bad. We had people who looked all over, didn't look at it was just very, very strangely off-putting. You see all kinds of things. So those have been kind of some of the big ones. I'll make a plug. We had a failed search for a biochemist. So if any of you are biochemists, biologists who are interested in being in a chemistry department and teaching biochemistry, we're open to anything that is biological or biochemistry. So we'll be opening that search up again in the fall. You're absolutely welcome to reach out to me and ask any questions. So I'll just make that plug for now.
Thank you.
We're in the middle of 3 job searches right now, which is a bit of a headache on our part. And that actually brings up a good point. Everything they've said, I'll echo, but the thing to remember for any job you're applying, not even if it's just a teaching job, is the most important thing you need to do is realize that you can't make generic applications and blast them out. That's not going to work, because it becomes obvious you don't know what you're applying for. We don't like doing the job searches in the sense that it's a huge time sink for us. So we want to see how you're going to fit with us. We want to make sure that you're going to be happy and stay here. It really matters about fit, knowing your audience, knowing the school that you're applying, and writing the cover letter and your resume or CV to fit what that is. We had someone that in the middle of the phone interview said, when we said, one of the standard question is, Meredith College is a small private liberal arts institute for women. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, that was kind of the end of the interview right there. And so I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people make, is if you just send them out in mass, you're not going to get a lot of hits. You really need to think about how that works. They were saying typos, again, that's the most important document you'll ever create. It's the one that's going to get you that one is worth money, your CV and your cover letter. So make sure you check it, make sure it's intentional, see how you fit, engage with people during the interview process. You really should practice. It's been my experience is that, I think, this sounds like old man screaming at clouds, but I think the phone thing has really been problematic in the sense that people really have a tough time learning how to interact interpersonally with people, and you really should practice it. If you're not, it's not that something that most people are natural at, to be honest, and it takes some time and practice. If you sit there and you're overwhelmed and you say, I don't have questions, that's going to look bad. You ask questions, even if it's the same question. In these interviews, you're going to probably meet with 7 or 8 different faculty at different time points, and they're going to expect you to answer questions to show your interest. So just because you had it answered once doesn't mean somebody else, doesn't have a different perspective, but the lack of asking is going to make you look disinterested in the position, and it's going to hurt you. So be fully engaged, practice as much mock interviews as you can, be prepared for unusual questions, because a lot of times that's to throw you off and see how you respond, because being a faculty member, there's a lot of unusual things that nobody can prepare you for. Everything, how do you handle, this is just things to think about. You're almost in a way like a bartender. What if they're having problems at home? They're going to come and talk to you. If there's something even more frightening like sexual abuse or something of that sort, you've got to get some training and learn how to handle it. And it's something that nobody's comfortable. It's not that's not what we're trained in. And so being is sort of global and realizing that you're going to wear many different hats in the faculty role model really, I think, is beneficial. So you need to think broadly about it and not just focus on your research or maybe even your teaching.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that, something that I found really useful when I was going through the interview process. Whenever I had a video interview, I actually would write down sample questions that I think the committee would ask me, and sort of just brainstorm what answers I would have, what responses I would have. I wouldn't read off of that during the interview. It's really obvious when people are reading from a script, so definitely don't do that. But just to get in my mind, okay, these are the talking points that I want to make sure I hit if they ask me about the types of courses I could teach, or if they ask me about how my research program, how I could see it evolving there past my dissertation, or if they, ask me about what types of how I think I could contribute to service or possibly community engagement. I already sort of had some talking points for each institution that, represented not only the school, but the community that it was situated in, because it's important that you're thinking about, that the committee can see that you're thinking about becoming a member of their community and not just, not just another faculty member at the school. Because like Jason said, it's so much more. Like, doing research becomes such a small component of what you're actually doing every day. And it really, people do just want to see, like, can you see the big picture?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see past your dissertation research? Because we need people who can be flexible and who can wear many hats, and are okay with the unexpected coming up.
Yeah. And so another thing that some folks might be thinking about, so when I interviewed for my faculty position, I was actually 9 months pregnant. So I interviewed for one faculty position 5 days before I delivered. And then the job that I have now, I interviewed when my youngest daughter was 5 weeks old. So that was an odd personal lifetime. So be thoughtful. if you happen to be pregnant when you are applying, it is does not necessarily mean that you can't, but those are kinds of things to be thoughtful about. I didn't disclose that I was pregnant until I had gotten to the end of video interviews and people started saying, hey, we want to schedule you for campus interviews, just because I didn't feel like that was something I wanted to be on the committee's mind. But people were really lovely and gracious about scheduling things. So ask for what you need. Recognize too that you're interviewing them. And if you say, hey, I'm pregnant, and they're like, and they ghost you completely, you didn't want to be there anyway. That was never going to be the kind of place where you were going to have that work-life balance. If you say, well, I'm going to have a 5-week-old, and so I'm going to need breaks for pumping, and I'd like to make sure that my spouse and my child can come with me. If they balk at that, then that's going to be the kind of place where if your kid gets the flu and you're home for a week, or like Jason was saying, you know, Wake Forest had 7 hours of class those kinds of things happen. And your children hopefully are not going anywhere, and they are hopefully a very important part of your life. And so be thoughtful about that and recognize that if you're applying at a university who's going to be that way, you didn't want to be there anyway. So that's a good time for them to show you who they are too.
That's a great point. And just a quick plug for the graduate students, if you're not aware, we do all kinds of document review. We do mock interviews. If you're a postdoc, you can do that through postdoc services as well. So there's lots of support if you haven't sought that out yet. So thanks to everyone for echoing that. Just in the last few minutes, I was wondering if any of our panelists would like to leave us with just sort of a final thought or last piece of advice, and then I'll open it up for a few questions that I see.
So I'd jump in and say, I think Jason and Lauren both also kind of hit on this a little bit, but just to kind of say it explicitly, you're going to wear hats that you don't know you're going to wear. The number of times you will find yourself being a pseudo parent and giving lots of life advice. Yesterday, I had a student in my office and I was trying to explain to her that she may want to move out of her parents' house, but was she also prepared to pay for rent and insurance? And like, I went through what she would have to pay for, and she was like, oh my God, like it just had never occurred to her that, you know, her parents were doing her a solid by paying for her career. And for her college. So there are those moments where you find yourself going, really? But they need to hear that. And so being thoughtful about, you know, is that something you want to be doing at a primarily undergraduate institution, or at a place where you are going to work with a lot of undergrads and where that mentoring is expected? That's going to be a part of the job that may not exist at larger state university or larger R1 university. And if you're like, I don't want to know about these kids, I don't want to know about their personal lives, I don't want to know what they do outside of 9 to 5, I don't want to know what they do inside 9 to 5 outside of their homework, then this may not be the best career fit for you, because there's going to be a lot of that coming your way. There's ways to mitigate it, but that's that kind of personal interaction with those students is something that I find to be one of the most rich aspects of my job. So I like it, but there's definitely colleagues for whom that is not their favorite part.
Yeah, I'll put in a plug like Meghan did. So we are also looking for visiting assistant professors right now. So if you're interested, please reach out. And we'll see. We're hiring a lot right now since we're definitely still in a startup phase in our department. But my piece of advice would be, when you're going on interviews, really, for me, the most important part are working with colleagues, you know, the environment being a supportive one. So like Meghan and Jason also said, you know, make sure that the fit matches, because it's not just about, say, getting into the best institution possible, the one that's highest rank on US News and World, because you might not be happy there. It might be in a place that's really far from people that you know, and so you're just sort of and that might be important to you, or it's in a place that doesn't necessarily have the support or mentorship that you might need. And so it's really important to think about those things, because that's going to influence the long-term sustainability of the career for you. If you're not able to be happy there, even on the worst days, because there are going to be some bad days, it's going to be a struggle, and the job is already hard enough, trying to balance it all, which doesn't really happen. So just make sure that you enjoy your colleagues, you enjoy where you are, and spend a lot of time thinking about that. It's easy to sort of spam and send out a bunch of applications, but ultimately really put thought into the institutions that you're applying to. And even for me, I didn't initially think that I would end up at a non-R1. This is the only non-R1 that I applied to, but after going through the process, I really found that this was a good fit for me, but also my family, because I wanted to still see them while I was working. And that those are important. Don't discard those things. Don't put them second to your career, because you have to be able to do both, have both.
And for me, I would say you've got to do what you're passionate about. And one of the things that working at what I've noticed, and we actually made this observation when we were doing these search committees, everybody that's in our department who I collaborate with or work with on a daily basis is passionate about what they do. We have plenty of people that come and go who aren't passionate about the work. So you really have to get some experience to see what it's like to actually be a faculty mentor, in the sense it's difficult. TAing is one thing, but it's really difficult. So if you have the opportunity to guest lecture, see what it's like, spend a day with a faculty member, you need to take it. We are always looking for adjuncts. We don't, so that's sort of the lifeblood of service courses that fulfill needs in lots of departments. If you have the opportunity, or if you're interested in teaching, I'd recommend seek that out as much as possible. It's going to give you experience, but you can really see, do I really like doing this? Because as I mentioned before, it's a lot different than I think you might imagine it to be. It's much different than I imagined it would be when I was a grad student or as a postdoc. It's just different when you have different responsibilities, when you're the person who's overseeing 40 some odd people in the classroom, let alone in the research lab. You really got to know how that works, and you got to like it. If you don't like it, you're gonna hate these jobs. And we do get people that say, this is not what I thought, and they burn out and they get out quick, and good for them, because they recognize they're going to be miserable doing this work. But I would argue for most of us that persist in this, we just do it because we love it. Money's never good. the time, there's never enough time, but it's great a feeling to get up in the morning and go to work and want to be at work and happy to be at work. I wish that for everybody. So I think that's the key, is just make sure it's what you want to do and get as much experience to ensure that's what you want to do.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I'm just going to try to sneak 2 quick questions in that we have from folks. One is, should students or postdocs focus on publications in terms of, does it matter for the hiring process in terms of number of publications or impact journals that they have? Does it not matter at all, or it depends?
It depends on where you're applying. And again, you have to think about what's important to you and find institutions that match. So if you're passionate about research, and you make a big deal about your research for an application at Meredith College, it's not that we say, you're going to be terrible here. It's that we're going to say, you're going to be miserable here because we can't give you what you have spent your time doing. You clearly are passionate about your research. You're not going to have that same opportunity here. So none of those things matter for us. In fact, it could be a detriment to some extent. You really need to be thinking about what your end goal is. If you want to go to, say, NC State, yes, absolutely, those journals are going to matter. But for Meredith College, it's going to work against you. So I think it's important that you identify what you want out of your career, what's important to you, where you view research, and then figure out a school that meets that. Because again, I think we have 3 examples of different types of universities that meet different levels of that kind of expectation.
Yeah, I'll say from my perspective at Wake Forest University, it's It's not that we're looking for a certain number when someone applies or impact factor of the journal when someone applies, but I think it is helpful since there is an expectation that you develop your own research program, and that's going to take up 40% of your time, that for us, it's just an indication that this person knows what it's like to publish because they are expected to do it. And it's not that if people haven't published from their PhD that's, a big X, but there's so many other things that they're going to have to learn once they start this job. So having that's something that's sort of taken care of. You've gone through publishing, you sort of know what that process is like. You've been able to successfully get a peer-reviewed article out there. It definitely helps because it's one less thing that we know that you have to take on in addition to the service that's going to come and the teaching load that's going to come.
I think HPU is similar. I don't have a publication coming out of my PhD from Duke. So, and I got the job. But I do have many coming out of my postdocs. So, if you have a weakness in one area, trying to make sure that your letter writers address that, like they are coming or, this is what happened. Also, I'd say if you're looking at a place that does have a focus on undergraduate mentorship and undergraduate research, anytime you can take an opportunity to say, hey, there's an undergrad on this paper with me and I mentored that undergraduate to that publication, those people are particularly successful because it tells us that you have a sense of what undergraduates can accomplish and you have mentored them in the lab and been able to do that successfully towards some outward measure. And even if they don't have a publication, if they've gone and presented a poster, anything you can do to kind of show that type of engagement with undergraduates and that kind of mentorship in the laboratory setting or in the classroom setting, if you have that as well, those kinds of things are particularly noteworthy to us.
Okay, great. And last question that comes from someone. Everyone has stayed on, so thank you attendees for staying. Are there any faculty in either of your departments whose research agenda is more focused on pedagogy or similar areas?
Yes, a lot of people in my department, in addition to doing their very technical engineering, whatever field they're in related research, does research in engineering education. And actually our department as a whole, we're going under a process to get IRB approval so that any of us, if we would like to, can do research on our teaching. And so something that I've actually done in my class, I've implemented a new pedagogical approach to teach a numerical methods class to undergrads. And Wake Forest has a really great center for the advancement of teaching, and their whole role is to support our development as teachers and also to help if we want to do research on our teaching. So they've come in and they've done observations and focus groups, and we were actually able to submit a conference paper to ASEE. So we'll see if that gets accepted. But yes, I think it's important, and it definitely shows, at least where I'm at, that you are super invested in your teaching. And for me, everything teaching research, it's an iterative process, right? I'm always trying to learn and get better. And so for me, this is also an opportunity to reflect on what I'm doing well in the classroom versus, things that I need to change. So it's not necessarily, for me, it's not about getting the publication. That's a nice feature of it, but it really is just for me to make sure that I'm doing my best as an educator and I'm really helping the students that I'm working with.
Okay, great. Well, Jason, Lauren, Megan, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the attendees. We will upload this session onto the Postdoc Services YouTube channel, so please check out other videos, tell your friends. Any of you who were listening who are interested to follow up with any of our panelists in terms of the open positions or just any future questions that you have, is the best way to look up your faculty email address online and reach out to you that way? Excellent. Okay.
One more final statement before I go is a lot of small colleges are always looking for people to adjunct, and so if your PI is cool with it, I encourage you to reach out to a small college near wherever you are and then see if they need someone to help, if that works out, that's a great way to get experience.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Everyone have a great weekend and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.